Well, hello and welcome to this episode of the Visible Workplace. My name is Dr. Tom Rolley, and today we're going to be looking at a very exciting development that is happening in the world, or at least in my world, which is the development of the Magic Board's minimum viable product, also known as the MVP. Now, let's have a little trip down memory lane and have a look at, well, why on earth would we need software to execute what essentially is a bunch of documents and spreadsheets? And that is a really good question. But I had got into a situation where I got fascinated by this question of systems. I'd read a lot of books and been to a lot of seminars and people constantly talking about this idea of systems. And yet when I pressed for, hey, what is a system? There really wasn't that much information. People just kept saying, hey, you need to use systems. You need to use systems if you want to run a business, if you want to get stuff done. And yet, when the question got asked, well, how do I do that? How do I set up a system? Then it kind of broke down. And so I went on a quest, a journey to look at this. And I didn't really begin wanting this. I just wanted to make my world work better. I was running Graduate Medicine, a medical education company, and I'd already been burnt pretty badly trying to expand from myself to a VA, to a second VA, to two doctors, to a manager, and everything went very pear-shaped very quickly. And I had been aware that I needed to know about systems and processes, and I'd actually invested in a course that was like, hey, here's how to set this up. And it had some wonderful insights that were instrumental in getting to the Magic Board design. And yet their design for systems was essentially a one-page document that described what the system did. It was like, hey, do these 3 steps and get these 2 outcomes. And this to a degree was helpful. It was like, oh, okay, I'm seeing a link between the processes and the results, and we're going to document that. But that's all it was really good for. It actually had no tracking and no deadlines. It had no ability to really repeat that design and get that tracking. And what I came to was a very interesting place. And that was that the tracking of work in business is handled over on one side by project management software. And it does a pretty good job of that. But over on the other side, we've got this whole other category of software that tracks processes. And there was not a lot of meeting. And as I went through with one particular question, which was, what is the system to create systems? And I began working with this work. The gentleman's name was Tim Francis out of Profit Factory. And he had given these documents and he said, hey, let's have a document for the system, and let's have a document for processes, and let's have a document for templates, and let's have a document for resources. And these were labeled very clearly, and it was just one folder for each of these. And this was the beginning. And he also shared a wonderful insight, which was that people learn. And you must design processes for people who have never done it before and need every detailed step. And then you need to design it for someone that has some competency, that just needs to go through and see the big steps. And then you also need it to handle someone who's extremely experienced and doesn't need to look at the instructions at all. And the analogy for this would be like an experienced chef. An experienced chef does not need to go to the recipe book for a lot of their things. They can just list them off. They've memorized them. It comes out almost automatically. And yet, someone who's never cooked before could in many, many, many cases, replicate that to a degree as long as they could perform the cooking in the right timeframes. And cooking is one of those things, particularly at a high level, where there are timeframes. But in business, often those timeframes are a little bit less. It's a little less critical whether the egg gets cooked for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, or 5 minutes as an analogy. Whether I take 15 minutes to do the document or 20 minutes to do the document is probably not as mission critical as a chef working in the kitchen, and they have to produce to a time frame. But nonetheless, the idea that there are following steps that they have memorized versus someone who could follow those same steps, and particularly if they weren't able to, then they could upskill, but they're going through the same steps. And so Tim was like, hey, design your processes for this capability. Have a big heading and then have some bigger, smaller steps and then have some detail. And this was really useful because it often allowed to get to things quickly. We could document where the templates were held, click the link and go straight there. I wasn't left searching through Google Drive trying to find a template, hoping that I've named them effectively. I could just click the link and I'm right there. But this all culminated in another realization, and that is a document for managing systems is relatively inadequate. Yes, it does give a description of the processes and the results, which was wonderful. It's great. Just like in IKEA, if we put the instructions with the work, then it's a whole lot more likely that the work will get completed correctly. But in terms of tracking, in terms of due dates, in terms of responsibility, a document for a system was greatly inadequate. It just didn't have the capacity for any of that. And one day I'm going along and I'm like, you know what? How about I track where I'm up to with the process? And so I put the processes in a spreadsheet, or more specifically into Monday. And I don't remember when they changed over. It might well have even been Depulse back in the day. Back in the day it was Depulse and then it got changed to Monday. But the insight that I had was that I'm going to track my processes so I can see where they were. And I put a link to the Google Doc that had the instructions. And then below that was the results that those processes created. And in the beginning, it started working. In fact, that was not where it began. Where it began was just tracking the process because I kept getting distracted. I have too much on. I got kids. I got dinner, do this, make lunch, distraction, distraction, distraction. And so it started just by tracking the processes. And then I saw that next level, which was, hey, here are these processes and here's the results that they're producing. I started tracking those in that one design. And that was when the magic board design got born. And in this spreadsheet, or in Monday, we could have a status for where things are up to, and we could have a due date, and we could have a link to the work, and we could have who's responsible. And all of these things came together in this one design and began to experiment and try it out for different things. Well, would it work for marketing? Would it work for sales? Would it work for advertising? What about accounting? What about hiring? What about optics? And it started working for all of these things. And I'm like, oh, hang on. This is like the general solution for systems. It allows a trackable experience of a repeating set of work that gives a consistent outcome. And this to me is like, what is a business system? Well, we have a definition now. A business system is a trackable, repeatable process creating tracked, consistent results. I've got a tracking on my processes. I've got a tracking of my results, and it's repeatable. And this basically came down to copying a template for the processes and the results, and then using that as the system. And suddenly it was like, okay, hang on. I can get this library of systems and make a copy of one, and then I've got a clean experience to go through and track the processes and track the results. And when it's done, I can archive it and say, hey, that got done and the work got done. And there's many advantages to this. Number one, I knew that it worked. I'm like, okay, if I want these results, then here are the instructions to get it. If I want to build a Lego and I'm given the parts, I can just follow the instructions and it will produce that Lego. If I want an IKEA table and I've got the parts and I follow the instructions, I will get an IKEA table. If I want a chocolate cake and I've got the ingredients and I follow the instructions, I'll get a chocolate cake. We're starting to see a pattern here that when I do those steps, step, I get an outcome. And there might be intermediate steps and there might be templates required. But the overall outcome is that I know that it works. Next up, I didn't have to waste time doing extra work that was superfluous, that didn't actually contribute to the outcome. And this was a significant time saving, but nothing compared to the time saving of having incorrect work done when I wanted a result, but the wrong thing got done, and then having to redo it. This is extremely expensive, much more than doing work that doesn't actually end up or that's not required. But having to redo whole chunks of work is frustrating. It's demoralizing and it happens all the time. Why? Because even if we're using project management systems, we don't have access to the processes. And these can be kept. These might have even been built, but they sit on a shelf or they sit in a folder where no one uses them. They don't get updated and they go out of date, and then they have less value when I come to use them one time and they're designed for 3 years ago and they have no value. And this happens because they're not being used. Things that aren't used decay. We live close to the ocean here, and things that aren't used definitely decay very fast. End up having to put bikes into the trailer to take the tip, lawnmowers in the trailer, electronics in the trailer. Anything that does not get used in this environment decays very quickly. But this is the same principle for systems that don't get used because the processes are somewhere else. They go out of date, things change. People can't make improvements. They find a better way and start doing it that way, but they don't update the instructions. Why? Because it's hard to update the templates. It's very difficult. You've got to make the changes in the one that you're working on and then remember to go over to the library and make the changes there. And all of this led to a problem that I was facing, which is like, there are too many catches in systems. There's too many gotchas. There's too many small details that us as human beings need to remember to do. And can it be done? Absolutely. We can be trained to go through and remember to do all of these things. But most people aren't willing to make the effort. Why? Because you can take shortcuts in all of these systems. You can take a shortcut and not use the instructions that have been proven and still get pretty close most of the time. Now, every now and then, you're not close at all and it's a total disaster. And then people like get angry at each other. But it has to be that the instructions are easier to use, that are more beneficial to use. And then it's like, hey, I want to make my life easier. Oh, the instructions are right there. Great, let's use them. But I tried to teach this methodology to others and they got it. But copying Excels and copying templates, it's too hard. And so I knew for a while that the way forward was software, and I've been working on it. Now, software comes with some problems. Like traditionally, the only way to handle building a project management system would be to go to venture capital. And this is what many of the companies did. Monday's gone for venture capital. Asana is funded by Atlassian, who own Jira. And Jira has been a massive success story. It's a Kanban system. And they were just like, well, let's just buy Trello and let's just buy Asana. And they're funding it. And then the back-end development can be done. But it's a lot of effort, millions of dollars typically. And I was like, you know what? Okay, I'm going to have a really cool idea. What I'm going to do is prove a couple of systems that I know work. And we're going to put them in software so I can learn what to do. And this was my first experience. This was actually my second experience. My first experience was back in the days of PHP in 2006, and I got bitten pretty badly there. That did not work. I was like, okay, that didn't work well. Put it to bed for like 15 years and then come back, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to be really smart. We're going to spend a lot of money getting the blueprints really dialed in. So we went to Figma and I spent like 17.5 grand or something. I'm like, sweet, we're ready to roll. And then dev began, and it was like, well, that was $5,000, and that was $5,000, and that was $5,000. I'm like, well, hang on, we've only built 3 pages, and that was $15,000. And they're like, yeah, well, what did you think? And I'm like, well, hang on, there's like 58 pages here. My budget is not $250,000. You probably should have told me that. But they're like, okay, yeah. I'm like, no, stop. So we stopped. And then there was a little revelation that's happened that you may or may not be aware of. And that was Bubble. And I had 3 people in 1 week come and say, hey, Tom, do you know about Bubble? And Bubble got me so excited, so amazed. And I'm like, you know what? Let's just go for the project management system. And I went for it, and it was a disaster. Unfortunately, the skill sets required to build no code are quite high, that you really, if you're going to follow the no-code path, then do consider who you're using. Brute force won't work as well as having people that know what they do, that do it well. Expertise makes a difference. And so I went with this first experience of going to a third world nation, which had worked very well for other things, but it did not work for design, and it was a disaster. I ended up putting a whole bunch of money in again. And then I was like, you know what? Okay, fine. I've been bitten a couple of times now. I'm going to have one more go. And I went and came to the Australians. I'm like, hey, you guys know what you're doing? They're like, yeah, we know what we're doing. And I jumped in and started on this Australian experience, and it's been really good. We are close at 4 months to having an MVP. Next week, we'll lock down the MVP. And I have ported all of my business across. The MVP is not quite finished. I'm still digging up little bugs. But overall, it's going very, very well. So that is a revelation that's going on right now. All right, I got my gardener coming up. So I think we're going to call it a day there today. Actually, before we call it, I want to let you know that the outline for this very podcast was indeed written on the Magic Board software MVP. I'm sticking with it. I'm rolling with it. This thing is coming, and it's going to get rid of a lot of the problems that we're dealing with in terms of copying and how to improve these systems. So, all right. It looks like I got some brush cutting outside. I hope you're having an awesome day. Thanks for joining me today. Like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode as we continue this journey into the exploration of systems, templates, processes, and ultimately magic boards. Thanks so much for joining me. My name is Tom Rolley. Look forward to seeing you next time. See you then. Thanks for joining us at the Visual Workplace. This is a notification that the information and ideas discussed here are general in nature and do not take into account your specific circumstances. You should seek specialist advice for any medical, financial, emotional, mental, or other difficulties that you are facing with appropriate specialists and professionals so that they can apply your specific circumstances and give you the required advice. Thank you for joining us, but this is also a notification that all information is indeed general in nature and not specific for your personal circumstances.